العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ومولانا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم إلى قيام يوم الدين. May your fasting be accepted, inshallah. Your acts of worship be accepted. One of the advice that one of our scholars that excelled in spirituality and worship, he has about 9 pieces of advice for Shahr Ramadan. Ayatollah Abdul Karim Kashmiri, great scholar. He passed away maybe 20 years ago. And in his admonition and advice for the month of Ramadan, one of them I'll say tonight, I've been going over them at the beginning, some of them. He says that people have a problem, and that is they have a desire to read a lot, to worship a lot, but they do not care about the quality of what they read, of how they perform that action. They insist, even though it's good, you have to read, say, the whole Quran. You have to read all this dua in the night of Qadr, for example. But he says, but what we should be focusing more, and this is a question for you, is quality better, more important, or quantity? Should I read more, or should I read less with pondering, with thinking, with reflection and effect? To answer this, he says this: how many times, how many Shahr Ramadan did you have? How many people recited the entire Quran? How many people read so many prayers in Mafatul Janan? But what effect did it have on us? Did it change us or not? And if we have a parrot recite the Holy Quran, all of it, would that parrot have a lot of reward? Or no, there would be no reward for the parrot. So just reciting dua and prayers, even though I'm going to answer this later on too, is not by itself that important. Waking up, the Quran is dhikr. Waking up, paying attention to the Quran, reflecting, and most importantly, acting upon what we read. Then you will get the reward of recitation, you get the reward of these du'as. Or else we have many people, they just love, and usually in our culture we get our fingers wet before we change the pages, and we just go and flip through the entire book, but at the end of Shahr Ramadan we're the same person, nothing has changed. But one person reads one verse. Actually, Sayyid Abdul Karim Kashmiri has a very, very interesting advice. He says, take one verse of Quran, one verse, and think of that verse the entire day. That entire day, one verse that you like. Keep saying it and think about it, think about it. He says during iftar, that verse will open up the curtains for you. That one verse. One verse of Quran is sufficient for us to be guided. So therefore, we have to stray away from the fact that we have to recite this much, and now I have done this dua, now I'm done with Laylatul Qadr, for example, because we're preparing ourselves for the night of destiny. Now I'm done with Laylatul Qadr. I've read all the duas, so Allah must accept me, inshallah. But actually, many people that if you look, that have changed, it was with a very short but sharp connection. One ittisal, connection to either Quran or Ahl al-Bayt that changed them. Look at Hur, for example, the companion of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, who was Yazidi. It was a short meeting with Abu Abdullah, with Imam Hussein, that didn't take a long time, and he changed. Imagine comparing to those that would visit Imam Hussein their entire life. So what we are looking for in Shahr Ramadan is quality, reflection, change. If we do not change in Shahr Ramadan, when are we going to change? If we are not forgiven, when are we going to be forgiven? True, when you recite the entire Quran and learn, sometimes by reciting it long, then the quality also changes as well. The quality also changes as well. So yes, quality is important. I'm not saying not to recite the Holy Quran Shahr Ramadan or to not do any du'as, but you're trying to look for that specific connection. You're trying to look for that specific ittisal with God, which is the most important. Let's recite Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. The topic that we are going over is Surah al-Anbiya, the chapter of, what does Anbiya mean? The chapter of the prophets. How many prophets are in the Quran? About 25. How many prophets are mentioned in Surah al-Anbiya? About 15, 16. Very briefly, very short. But the chapter is explaining, we're on verse 11 now, from the 10 verses explaining the challenges that Rasulullah is having and how it's very similar, these arguments, these challenges, and what is going to happen, very similar to what happened to the previous prophets. Because if a person wants to reject Allah, they will have the same excuse. Tonight we start with verse 11, and it would be nice if you would have your Qur'ans too. So again, you can think about these verses, and when you go home, read Surah al-Anbiya, look at it a little bit, and ask questions. If I know the answer, we'll cover it. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وكم قصمنا من قرية كانت ظالمة وأنشأنا بعدها قوما آخرين. And how many a city which was unjust have we shattered and produced after it another people. Qasamna with a sad, qasamna means to shatter, to break. So Quran is saying to the khitab is to the mushrikeen and polytheists that Rasulullah is speaking to, Prophet Muhammad is speaking to, in warning them, how many people before did we shatter them, break them? How many of a city which was unjust have we shattered and produced after another people and then tested another people? So when we understand this is the sunnah of God, that God would send prophets to test the people. And if they did not pass their test, many of them, how many of them? Were demolished and destroyed. So what does this cause us to think? How do we think about this? We think that the mushrikeen and polytheists at that time, is a warning for them. Saying, be careful. He is rahmatun lil alameen. He is very merciful. But look at the sunnah and look at the way of all the other prophets and their people. Look of how many of them were destroyed. So be careful, Quraysh. If you do not follow, because this chapter, some say, is towards the end of the 13 years in Mecca, before Hijrah. So the end of these 13 years, you better be careful. You have bothered, you have oppressed. And that is why the title of this sermon or this discussion is the warning that Allah is giving to the oppressors of Rasulullah. And we'll talk about the fact of khawf and warning. Sometimes warning and fear is needed, is necessary. And we'll talk about it. How many of you, when you pray Salatul Fajr, is it because of the warnings of God, or is it because you're in love with Allah? Which one really? Be honest. When you want to wake up for Fajr, how many people say, Allah, I'm saying, I love you, let me wake up? Or is it, Allah, you're going to do something bad to me, I better pay attention. It's warning, khawf, fear. It's important for us to have it. Or for example, fasting. A lot of times you look at that delicious orange juice and you're fasting, or that tea, and you want to have it. Or do you say, Allah, I love you so much, I won't have it? Or what will happen to me if I have this orange juice? What will happen to me? Bala will happen to me. So warning is important for us. So Rasulullah, Allah is warning in the Quran, Quraysh, you better pay attention. This is the final messenger. And we see too that actually Quran is mentioned beautifully, وَقَرْيَةٍ كَانَتْ ظَالِمَةً. Does Allah randomly destroy people? No, it is because of their oppression. It is because of themselves. It is actually a result of their own action. That's why we read tonight the tradition, inshallah, that mentions, do not fear God. Fear your own actions. You are fearing, your khawfullah is in reality fearing my own actions. I'm afraid of what I have done. I'm afraid of what if God does not forgive me and what my actions can do. Why should we fear of our actions so much? Let me explain to you something. Sometimes we are with the youth and they ask us questions and they say, for example, how come if you commit a sin or you're a terrible person, you'll be punished in the hereafter forever? We are here very limited in this world, but yet the punishment is forever. How come with a little bit of bad, with a little bit of oppression, 50 years of oppressing or bad, you get hellfire forever? The answer to this in one way is, to be in hell forever is not for everyone. In Dua Kumail it mentions those that are mu'anid, those that have stubbornness, those that are perpetually fighting with the messengers and with Allah. Khulud in Jahannam is for them. There are people that will enter the hellfire and they'll be forgiven. It will take a very long time, thousands, hundreds of thousands of years possibly. But there are people that will be freed from hell. Two, because we are talking about the effects of the spirit, and sin is an effect of the spirit, effects of the spirit last forever as long as the spirit lasts. But if I affect, for example, I cut off my arm, for example, I don't have an arm for the rest of my life until this body works. It's temporary. In the reality of things, it's temporary because it's 70 years, because the body is temporary. But if I affect my spirit, then it lasts forever. It is, for example, like I take a pen and God forbid, I hit it in my eye, stab myself in the eye with a pen. I can be blind for my whole life, yes or no? For one instance, one short action caused me an entire life of being blind. So in the same way, when you talk about the spirit, that we have to be so careful about the damage and harm to the spirit more than to the body. More than to the body, because the spirit lasts forever. So therefore, when you talk about fear of Allah, fear of what they did to themselves, they did dhulm to themselves, and therefore they deserve this punishment. Yes, there were groups of people that were freed or forgiven. And Rasulullah did not want clearly to have chastisement or punishment upon them. فَلَمَّا أَحَسُّوا, verse 12. فَلَمَّا أَحَسُّوا بَأْسَنَا إِذَا هُمْ مِنْهَا يَرْكُضُونَ. And when its inhabitants perceived our punishment, now that they were very arrogant, and we're going to mention inshallah tonight some of the stories of the arrogant ones. For example, Nimrud. Nimrud was the king of which prophet? During which prophet? Prophet Ibrahim. And those that were so arrogant, but look, فَلَمَّا أَحَسُّوا بَأْسَنَا إِذَا هُمْ مِنْهَا يَرْكُضُونَ. But then when our punishment was coming for them, then at once they began to run. Now they begin to flee. Now they are cowards. Now they are fearful. But when it came to those prophets like Saleh, and we said the story of Prophet Saleh and Thamud, they built these homes in rocks, and they asked, Prophet Saleh asked for them, which miracle do you want? And they said, bring from these mountains, they live in the mountains, bring from these mountains a camel. How does a camel come from the mountains, for example? So the camel came, and فَكَذَّبُوهُ فَأَقَرُوهَا فَدَمْدَمَ عَلَيْهِمْ رَبُّهُمْ بِذَنْبِهِمْ. So then Allah punished them, all of them together, because, and some say it was 3 days, some say it's 3 days of punishment from sayha, from a screen, from shaking, and different natural disasters that would happen to this Qawm al-Thamud. And now they are afraid. Now that when they came to Prophet Saleh and he showed the camel the miracle, they slaughtered it. You know, in the traditions, it's interesting. It says that we are the example, Ahlul Bayt, are the example of the Naqa of Saleh. How are Ahlul Bayt the example? Because the Naqa of Saleh was what? An ayah of God, a sign of God, right? It was a miracle. We were also the signs of God. Ali ibn Abi Talib, who this month, Shahr Ramadan, is also the month of Ali, was Ayatullah al-Uzma, according to himself, who is Naba'ul Azim, is the great event, is the greatest sign. And he says, Ma hiya ayatun akbar minni. There's not a sign greater than me. In this month, they slaughtered, they killed Imam Ali alayhi salam. They took his family, Hussein ibn Ali, slaughtered him and his family members. They were the signs of God, because the signs of God, the best of the signs of God are humans. More than a mountain, more than a camel. These are the signs of God. Perfect creation. And from perfect creation, you have perfect insan. The best signs of God, they killed. So the tradition says, we are the naqa. We are the she-camel of Prophet Saleh, that we were a sign for people. But yet they came and they killed us. Verse number 13. لا تركضوا وارجعوا إلى ما أترفتم فيه ومساكنكم لعلكم تسألون. Some angels, here's this commentator adds this sentence here, some angels. We don't know who says this, maybe angels, maybe prophets, but this is the sentence. Do not flee, لا تركضوا, don't flee, but return. وارجعوا إلى ما أترفتم فيه. Return where you were given luxury. You know, mutrafin are those that are usually in luxury, living in a life of excellence, for example. Go back, وَمَسَاكِنَكُمْ. Go back to your homes. Go back to your luxury, it says. Actually here, one of the mufassirin says this is a statement making fun of the zalimeen. This is Allah's warning to them, making fun of them. And some say this sentence, لَعَلَّكُمْ تُسْأَلُونَ, means go home to your big homes, go home to your large and comfortable lives, so that you can go back and people can ask you and do su'al. Because su'al doesn't necessarily mean a question, it means to ask for something. Go back to your large homes, go back to your lavish way of life, so people and poor people can come to your house and you can tell them, no, I'm not going to help you. No, I don't need to help you. I need to eat, for example. I'm not going to give you any help. This is one of the tafsirs, that when this bala and this punishment is coming, it says go back to your homes. It's interesting, it says homes, because usually one of the signs of affluence is a great home, a great house, a big house, for example. Sign of affluence. It says go back to your homes and have people ask you there, and you will, for example, reject them and they'll come back empty-handed. So in a way, they're ridiculing them. This punishment that's coming to you because you never provided shade for anyone. In the day of judgment, in Mahshar, there's going to be a very hot weather in Mahshar. There's going to be sun in a way that people are looking for shade. It's going to be very hot. And some people will have shade there in the manazil al-akhirah, the different stations. And they say, who is the one that has shade in the hereafter? Is the one who gave shade to others in this world. They gave shade to others. So in those stations that some of them last 1,000 years, 1,000 years, Allah will give shade to them. قالوا يا ويلنا, verse 14, قالوا يا ويلنا إنا كنا ظالمين. They said, woe to us, indeed we were wrongdoers. Now that the punishment is coming, it's too late. They see the clouds gathering, the wind is coming, for example, the screams are coming, the earth is shaking. Now they say, now we're the zalimeen. But this type, Quran says, the type of tawbah and repentance, when now death is approaching you, like Pharaoh, for example, now that he is drowning, then he says, I am of the Muslimin. Pharaoh said, I am of the Muslimin. It doesn't help anymore. Now it's too late because death has approached you. It's too late. Now they say we are of the oppressors. فَمَا زَالَتْ تِلْكَ دَعْوَاهُمْ حَتَّى جَعَلْنَاهُمْ حَسِيدًا خَامِدِينَ. And that declaration of theirs does not cease until they keep saying, we're the Alameen. They're yelling and crying, for example, we are the oppressors, we are the oppressors. It doesn't help until they become hasidan. Hasidan is a harvest that becomes mowed down. They get mowed down, khamidin, extinguished like a fire. And they're off. They're done and they're finished. So when we look at these verses, we have to talk about this topic about fear of God. Because today, everyone is afraid of everything except God. Sometimes, even though there are allergies, some people are afraid of peanuts. Peanut butter is more scary than God, for example. Or for example, giving a speech or lecture in front of others. One of the scariest things some people say, just to have public speaking, very scary. We're afraid of each other. We're afraid of others. We have so much haya. And some of it is good. Some of it, natural people are ashamed. But we are not afraid of God anymore. And we have to see, can we in Shahr Ramadan bring this feeling back to us that we can be kha'if of God, we can fear Him truly. I mentioned the story, how great it is of Ali ibn Abi Talib, because this is the month of Imam Ali. And prepare, as Ayatollah said, Abdul Karim Kashmir said, prepare yourselves for the night of God from now. So Ali alayhi salam would dig wells. And wells, you have to dig deep for a well, especially in somewhere that is very dry. And when he would come out of this well, Imam Ali had dirt and dust and mud on him. And before he would clean himself from this, he would say, bring a piece of paper, is narrated to say, bring me something. And Ali would write, Imam Ali would write and say, this is a waqf, this is an endowment, so that Ali alayhi salam can be freed from the hellfire. I made this well, people can benefit from it. Whoever wants can benefit from this fresh water. And did you know today, some of the wells that Imam Ali alayhi salam has dug, it still exists. And they label it Bi'r Ali alayhi salam. Some of the wells were in the Red Sea, for example. Some of the wells in other parts of Arabia. But Imam Ali alayhi salam did this. Why? He says, so I can be free from the hellfire. Anyone here can tell me they're going to heaven? Anyone here know what is going to be accepted from our actions? There is no guarantee, brothers and sisters. Sadly, there is no guarantee. Anyone here know if they will die with iman? Did you know that during death, there are mushahidat, there are things we witness, and some of them are the shayateen. When we are dying, Satans come, shayateen come, and they try to steal my faith away from me. Did you know that? How do we know we will die with iman? How do we know when we are in the grave and they bury us in the dirt? And you can look at some of these descriptions in Dua Abu Hamza Thamari, for example. And you see that this description, of the grave. How do you know when they ask you, for example, Man Rabbuk, Man Nabiyyuk, Man Imamuk? How do you know you will answer this correctly? Is it like today, like if they ask you, who is your Allah, you say, for example, who's your Lord? Allah Jalla Jalaluhu. It's not that easy, because death shakes us up. We have even traditions that people, when they go to the grave, they cannot answer anymore. They'll be shaken up. The only people that can answer these questions are a person that has took this knowledge and made it into ma'rifah and inside knowledge. So then when they go into the grave, at that time they will say, Allah is, Rasulullah is my Nabi, Imam Ali is my Imam, because it is part of them. Because all the other knowledge that is in this world will go, unless it becomes part of you, unless you truly believe in that knowledge. So is not Shahr Ramadan a time for us to fear Allah, to know and ask? How come in Du'a Joshan al-Kabir, we're going to be mentioning, I won't be here when we mention this, but he keeps saying, Al-Ghawth, Al-Ghawth, Khalisna min an-nari ya Rab. There's only one dua in this entire, 100 lines. 100 lines you're calling Allah. Line 2, line 5, line 20. You keep going, There's only one line of dua in it, one line of prayer, one line that you ask Allah for something, and that is to free us from the hellfire. Free us from the hellfire. Free us from the hellfire. So khawf and fear is something very important that has died for modern man. Modern man does not fear God anymore. But if you look at people before, or even other religions, they would call them people that are God-fearing. God-fearing. But today, and you can testify, go outside and look. They're doing whatever sins they want to do. The sins become worse and worse. And the traditions say when the sins become worse and worse, also the bala and diseases and different calamities become worse and worse for them. People do not fear God anymore. They fear each other. They fear, other aspects. Let's look at some of the traditions about fear of God, and we'll end tonight's discussion. Very interesting. Imam Ali, first of all, says that fear of God is something very important, very fruitful. Al-khawf sijnu nafs an al-dhunub. Fear is the soul's prison, preventing it from sinning. Fear of God is the soul's prison. It's you get afraid. When I'm afraid of God, I'm not going to sin anymore. It mentions it is a deterrent from disobedience. 2, explanation of fear. Imam Ali alayhi salam in Qur'an al-Hikam mentions, لا تخافوا ظلم ربكم. Do not fear oppression from your Lord. Allah will never oppress you. Don't fear of ظلم ربكم. ولكن خافوا ظلم أنفسكم. Fear from the oppression that you have done to yourself, as you say in, for example, دعائكم الظلمت نفسي. Because in reality, all of this is that you're just harming yourself. You're not harming God. God is glorified, is majestic. He does not need our worship. And if we do not worship Him, nothing happens to God. But if we become bad and we harm ourselves, then we have to be afraid of that effect that is going to last forever. We said these are spiritual matters. When you harm the soul, the effect of it is for eternity. Unless Allah has rahmah on us, unless Allah removes that effect from us. Whatever we do, it will last forever. Imam Ali alayhi salam in hadith says, لا تخف إلا ذنبك لا ترجو إلا ربك. Do not fear anything except your sin, and do not place your hope in anyone except your Lord. How can someone become like this, that they do not fear anyone but Allah? Let me give you the example of Nimrud and Ibrahim alayhi salam, because this is Surah al-Anbiya. Question. Some of those that question God's existence, like Bertrand Russell, would say that God's religion or God's worship or belief in God is only out of fear. Mankind only believes in God because he fears, and therefore because he fears, he believes in God. That is why he believes in God. The scholars answer Bertrand Russell and say this, that actually if this was true, that fear is the cause of belief in God, then why were the prophets of God the most courageous of people? If fear of God was fear was the reason why people believe in God, then the most fearful should be the most religious. But yet we see the most courageous are the most religious. Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam was very strong. At the age, and some of the stories have that he was hidden. Prophet Ibrahim, they commanded that every son, for example, in a way that another son or another person would not be born to overthrow the king at that time. So he was born and hidden in a cave. And at a young age, he comes down and sees all these different idols. And he looks at them and he says, these cannot be my God. And he begins to question why are people worshiping idols? Why are people worshiping idols? And then at the end, I'm going to fast forward until they go out and he takes the idols and he causes and breaks them. And then they come back, they say, who broke our idols? Who did this to our idols? We like them. He says, actually it was the largest of them. And the largest of them broke the other ones, killed the other ones. Now it comes to this other part of Prophet Ibrahim's life where he has to fight and challenge Nimrud, this great tyrant. And I said that person that fears God only fears God, doesn't fear the people. Prophet Ibrahim has a debate with Nimrud. Imagine against a very powerful, a cruel ruler. There Nimrud asks, who is your Lord? Ibrahim replies, my Lord is he who gives life and death. That is my Lord. Beautiful answer. So who is your Lord? My Lord gives life and gives death. Nimrud brings two servants. In the story it says, two servants. One of them murders right there. The other one he spares. Says, I am also like your Lord. I give life and I give death. I killed him and I gave life to him. And then Prophet Ibrahim mentions to him and says that now he knew he was getting Nimrud into a trap. And then he says to him that my Lord, and he explains to them that at that time Ibrahim felt equally triumphant, for Nimrud had unwillingly taken his bait by asserting that he and not God was the Lord of life and death. He was claiming to be Lord of the Lords. Ibrahim said casually, if you give life and you give death and you're Lord, then why don't you, my Lord, brings the sun from the east? Why don't you bring it from the west? And there Nimrud became very upset and he said to him, you are wrong. God does not make the sun rise from the east. I do, Ibrahim would have told him. So if you can make it rise from the east, then humor me and make it rise once from the west. And he says, I cannot make it rise from the west. Then he would be admitting that he was not the Lord of the Lords. So Prophet Ibrahim gives him and baits him into asking him to have the sun come from the west, rise from the west. And therefore, later on we'll tell the story of Nimrud and how Nimrud dies, and actually he has a fight with God. He is one of the ridiculous people that said, I'm going to go to war with God and I'm going to fight with God. Later on, if we have time, inshallah, we'll talk about his story. But the moral of the story is that Prophet Ibrahim, with the courage that he stood against Nimrud and debated against him, and in front of everyone he showed that my Lord is the one who gives life and death truly, and my Lord is the one who makes the sun rise from the east. If you can, make it from the west. So the moral of the story is that we should not fear anyone but Allah. And hopefully this Shahr Ramadan we can instill this fear in ourselves. But remember, just last note, besides fear, there also has to be hope. There also has to be raja. And these are a balance. We should fear God, and we should at the same time have hope and God's mercy. And if you look at the du'as, they're both. Some of the prayers talk about fear of God. Some of the prayers talk about love of God. In the Quran, in the same way, Shadidul Iqab sometimes is mentioned, or Arhamar Rahimin, for example. So we need to mix these two lights together, and they call this khawf and raja, a balance of fearing God and loving God. May Allah, inshallah, make us of those that are fearful of Him. Make us of those that fear sinning against Allah. May Allah forgive our sins in this Shahr Ramadan, except for fast and worship. Give us more tawfiq to worship Him, recite His book, and understand His book. Have mercy on the souls of our departed. And inshallah, expedite the return of the Imam of the age with a salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad.